Our top story this morning, just a few hours till President Obama is going to address the UN General Assembly. It's his fourth time doing so. But this time he does it in the midst of a presidential campaign in the wake of anti-American demonstrations around the world. Yesterday, the White House gave a preview of what to expect from the president. Listen.
He will also send a clear message that the United States will never retreat from the world. The United States will bring justice to those who harm Americans, and the United States will stand strongly for our democratic values abroad.
Senator John Barrasso is a Republican from Wyoming. He supports Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. He's also a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining us this morning, Elise Labott. She's CNN's foreign affairs reporter. Nice to have you both with us.
Thanks
Senator,
for having us.
You're welcome. We'll start with you, Senator, if we can. You wrote an op-ed in Politico, and you listed what you thought were three critical things that the president has to hit on when he gives his speech before the General Assembly today. Can you lay out for me what do you think he needs to say?
Well, the first thing is he needs to acknowledge that the war on terror continues. I mean, look at what you discovered from CNN, the private journals of Chris Stevens, who said a number of things. This was not about a video. He was being targeted by al-Qaeda. He said al-Qaeda was growing in Libya. He said there was a rise of Islamic extremism in that area. There truly is terrorism that continues. This is not because of a video. Number two, the president, when he says that for the people of Israel he has their back, he needs to outline exactly what that means at the time when Iran gets closer and closer to having a nuclear weapon. And third is the American people need to know what the president's foreign policy actually is. 4 years ago, he said, I can negotiate with Iran. That has failed. He said he would push the reset button with Russia. That has failed. And he said that the entire Middle East would look at him and the United States differently, would respect us more as a result of him in the White House. And that's failed.
So in that list of three things, the White House has now released some of the excerpts from what we know the president will say today. And I'll start with the last thing that you say about foreign policy. And in fact, this is maybe better from what he said on 60 Minutes, where he laid out, when you say he hasn't said what his foreign policy is, I think the White House would say, actually, he has. Here's a little clip of what he told Scott Pelley. Let's play that.
Well, let's see what I've done since I came into office. I said I'd end the war in Iraq. I did. I said that we'd go after al-Qaeda. They've been decimated in the Fatah. That we'd go after bin Laden. He's gone. So I've executed on my foreign policy, and it's one that the American people largely agree with. So, you know, if Governor Romney is suggesting that we should start another war, he should say so.
So that's obviously Steve Croft and not Scott Pelley there. But the point being, and these you hear a lot on the Democratic side, right? They tick off those exact same things and say, foreign policy-wise, and the polls support us, the American people think we're doing okay.
He said Osama bin Laden is dead and al-Qaeda is on the run. Al-Qaeda is not on the run. What we've seen is al-Qaeda targeted and assassinated our ambassador in Libya. That's the case. And then he called that a bump in the road. These are 4 dead American bodies who are in the road. This is so I think he is absolutely wrong there. When he talks about pulling out of Iraq, what we now know is that his military advisor said, leave people in Iraq, 15,000. He wasn't able to accomplish that, so right now Iran is flying supplies to Syria over Iraqi airspace. That shouldn't be happening, but it's being done to supply the Syrians who are massacring their people. This president has failed on foreign policy.
So, Elise, as I pointed out, maybe we can throw out some of these poll numbers. We know on foreign policy, actually, when compared to the job that the American people think the president is doing versus what Mitt Romney would do, he significantly beats Mitt Romney, even though some of those numbers have fallen over the last, couple of weeks or so, but not significantly and not very far outside the standard deviation. So what do you think that, do you agree with the senator that the president hasn't spelled out well enough and must do in these remarks today, foreign policy?
I think there are certain questions about what the president needs to do in terms of how is he going to address these rising anti-American protests. I mean, he did come to the office in 2009, made that famous Cairo speech promising to engage the Arab and Muslim world, and you see 3 years later, U.S. not much more popular in the Arab world than we were after 9/11. So in that sense, I think Americans, after this shocking attack on the consulate and these protests, want to see how President Obama is going to engage in this region going forward. I think there are also questions about Iran's nuclear program and how the president is going to address it. I think on the point of al-Qaeda and whether al-Qaeda is on the run, it's a little bit more complex than that, because you have al-Qaeda, the large organization. And then you have some of these splinter groups that are kind of sympathetic with al-Qaeda, affiliated with al-Qaeda. These are the ones that are believed to be responsible for the attack. But the issue of Islamic extremism, certainly very important, and that's why the president argues, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton argues, the U.S. has to keep getting engaged in this region, because if you look at what happened in the Arab Spring and these revolutions that kind of swept the Middle East, there was all this euphoria, and they were looking for the United States to support these demonstrators. Now we see extremists are trying to hijack, and this is what you call the second phase. So it isn't really a time for the U.S. to kind of retreat, but to continue to be engaged. And I think that's what you're going to hear President Obama talking about. And you are going to hear him talk about how to contain the crisis in Syria. But to some extent, the U.S. is held hostage to Russia and China on the UN Security Council, and the lack of general international will. I mean, the United States, yes, is the sole superpower, but I think when President Obama came into office, he said, you know, other countries have to share the load. And I don't, in some cases, you don't see that.
So you have said that you don't think that the president has done enough to spell out his support for Israel.
Well, he is not, but a couple things. One is the reset button of Russia has failed. We are still being held hostage by that. We know that China is funneling money to Iran in spite of all of the sanctions that we have. So I think that the president, additionally, with regard to Israel, needs to say exactly where the red line is, where the deadline is, and what it really means, so people in Israel and the United States and Iran know when the president says we have your back, what specifically does that mean?
I think on the issue of Iran, I mean, what U.S. officials tell me is, why should we spell out exactly what Iran needs to do? Want to keep Iran kind of guessing a little bit. Certainly, you know, it's coming to crunch time, and you know, I think it's not slowing down. I think it's not so important necessarily that the president spells out to the general public and to the Iranians what he needs to do. He needs to spell out privately to Prime Minister Netanyahu, this is where I'm prepared. And this is
so it would help if he actually met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president last year had 13 meetings with foreign leaders. He's meeting with no one this year at the United Nations.
And the White House has said, listen, we have a phone, you know, we can call foreign leaders if we need to. We certainly know that he's going to be on The View this morning, which has already been taped, but on both sides of the aisle, right? They've been doing the Letterman, Leno, View, Kelly, and, you know, those are kind of shows.
13 meetings with foreign leaders last year, none this year, but time for The View. I think that it misses the mark in terms of where the United States ought to be in foreign policy.
We will see how the voters feel about that. Senator, nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
We certainly appreciate it.